Good morning. You are very welcome back to the show. Now, the number of people being diagnosed with OCD in Ireland is ever increasing, but the stereotype surrounding it seems to be here to stay.
Here to tell us about his experience with OCD is David Monaghan, alongside psychologist Tara Logan Buckley. Thank you both so much for being here. David, thanks a million for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
Because we know that term OCD is a thing that we throw, oh, that person's OCD, oh my God, just because they're a bit particular or whatever. For you, you started showing symptoms when you were 11. How was it manifesting?
So it was kind of the typical signifiers of OCD when it first manifested. When I was a kid, it would have been excessive hand washing. But then as I got older, that kind of morphed into something a bit more distressing. So I guess over time, my ritualistic behaviours changed. So it kind of changed from being the excessive hand washing to the... I remember someone told me if you have a negative thought that pops into your head, you have to tap wood. You have to find wood and tap it. They didn't realise the impact that would have on me, but anytime a negative thought popped into my head, I had to find wood. And then another person told me if I couldn't find wood, I had to tap my head. And then eventually that turned into this sort of ritualistic tapping. So whenever I was out in public and a negative thought would pop into my head, I would have to tap in a very intricate way.
What do you mean by negative thought?
So... OCD is sort of dictated by illogic or irrationality. So it's kind of like this strange internal logic that you develop that only you understand. So OCD it's a broad spectrum of behaviour. It's a broad spectrum of thinking. Everyone has different triggers. For me, thoughts of excessive violence would pop into my head when I wouldn't want them to, when I'd be out in public. And then in order to combat them, I would have to do this ritualistic behaviour because you've sort of rationalised it to yourself that this is how you kind of quell them or dispel them.
Sorry, that's something I just never realised, Tara, because when we think of OCD, as you said, we think of having to do certain things, maybe turning on lights on and off. Again, we've got this stereotype view of what it is. Thoughts of violence.
Yeah.
Jumping into people's heads.
Yeah, and that's why it's really distressing. So a lot of the time, a lot of the distressing thoughts can be around violence, and that's either harming people that you actually really care about. They can actually be quite sexual thoughts as well, so performing sexual acts with people that you know that you shouldn't perform them, or with animals and things. And also there can be a lot of religious thoughts with that, and that's why a lot of the time it goes misundiagnosed, is because the people have so much shame and guilt. And that's a lot of the internal. So you've got a thing called pure OCD as well, where it's actually the ritual acts are completely internal, and a lot of that is linked with actually those way more distressing thoughts.
I think we saw this statistic around 3% of people in Ireland have OCD. But there's obviously different levels of OCD, Tara.
Yeah, there is. It can go from anywhere to mild severe. It's kind of on a spectrum. And what happens with OCD as well is a lot of the time it's misunderstood and it can be misdiagnosed as well. So a lot of the time if it starts in children or in adolescence, it might look like someone just has a particular routine, or someone might be not have attention in class because actually the thoughts are so distressing or the rituals are so much that actually you're really hyper-focused on doing those things to ease the anxiety. So, for example, get misdiagnosed as ADHD, as autism as well, or anxiety an awful lot of the time. A lot of people get your generalised anxiety disorder when actually it's OCD that they have. So I actually think that figure is a lot higher than what it is.
This is, misdiagnosis must be a huge part of this. For you, David, 11 is when you started displaying these behaviours. You weren't diagnosed until you were 23. So what were those 12 years like in the interim?
Kind of like walking through a fog. It was just sort of typified by confusion. My day-to-day kind of looked like it felt like I was walking through a minefield because, you kind of walk about and you're not sure what's going to trigger you or set you off. And without sort of a healthy frame of reference for what was happening, I was just kind of a bit confused, a bit lost, a bit scared a lot.
Especially if those thoughts are jumping into your head. Like,
well, you think because there's no frame of reference, you think you're just broken.
When you got that diagnosis, what can be done?
So I was already on SSRIs, which is their antidepressants, and my medication was tweaked to sort of accommodate the diagnosis. Then later on, I went to another psychiatrist and we tried exposure therapy, which was kind of slowly immersing myself into or dealing with the sort of triggers head on, which I found helpful. It was terrifying, but it was helpful.
What were some of your triggers?
I mean, thoughts of violence, or like maybe I'd come across a news article that would be, pertain to violence or something, and it would trigger all these thoughts in me, yeah.
Wow. So exposure therapy is you then having to read something like that. That must be, I'm going to be honest, like I've probably never had those sort of thoughts before in my entire life. That must have been awful.
Yeah, definitely. But like, I think if you do it slowly, for me personally, it kind of took away some of the power they had over me. I mean, look, OCD still affects me in peaks and troughs, and sometimes are worse than others, but, anything to sort of help take away some of the power those thoughts hold over me is welcome.
And in terms of dealing with those things, you were talking about like tapping your head and stuff. Is that something that's been encouraged then to help you deal with this, or are there other ways?
Ideally, I would want to stop doing that because, it's difficult if you're out and about in public and these thoughts hit you and you have to find somewhere to go because you can't stop yourself, or you feel very compelled to do these actions to deal with what's happening. So there are other ways to kind of deal with it, mechanisms? Yeah, I mean, some people recommend snapping a band or something.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure how you would interpret
But I
that.
can see an awful lot of people being misdiagnosed just hearing this.
Yeah.
Because, as you said, if thoughts like this are jumping into your head, you want to push those down, Tara, as much as you possibly can.
You don't want to tell people.
You don't want
I'm
to tell
sure.
anyone.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Like, this is frightening, actually, to be honest, to hear what's going on here. So if there's someone who's watching right now that's kind of like, OK, maybe they think they've got anxiety or they've got something else, what should people be looking out for and what should they do?
Absolutely. So everyone is very different. And what I would always say is a lot of the time, actually, it's what you hold most dear to, your values and your morals, are usually the intrusive thoughts that come. So actually, it's typically people who really are empathic, they're really kind, they're really careful, they've lots of morals and values, they've really great social justice. And what happens is then the distressing thoughts come for them, the opposite of actually what their character is. So you can imagine the amount of distress. What I would say is a lot of the stuff that we look out for is how long does this take per day? So in order to get the diagnosis, you have to be engaging in the acts or the thoughts for over an hour per day. So that's a lot of time, a lot of energy. And actually, when you talk to people, it's not an hour, it's hours. It's consuming all of the time.
Really, David, was it long? Was it?
It
like
was,
that for you?
yeah.
Was it?
Especially when I was younger and I didn't really know what was happening. It would be a lot more aggressive.
Yeah.
Wow.
In terms of getting a diagnosis then in Ireland, how difficult is it?
So what I would say to anybody is, first of all, is I would talk to your GP, but I wouldn't stop there. I would actually ask to see either a psychologist or a psychiatrist for a thorough assessment after that. Because what we need to do is there's so many other diagnoses, we need to be able to differentiate between them. We use kind of like standardised assessment tools, but it's really those more collaborative interview pieces to look at the behaviours, the reassurance seeking, the accommodations, but the impairment that actually it brings to the person's life as well, and going from there. One of the things I would say is an awful lot of people go for standard talk therapy for OCD, and actually this is not a thing to do. So if you're someone who thinks you have OCD and you're going to talk therapy, that actually isn't beneficial, because what can actually happen is you're actually feeding into the loops of the OCD thoughts and rituals by getting reassurance. So when David was speaking about the exposure piece, it's called CBT with ERP. That's the gold standard therapy. So I always say that to people, that actually, even though you think you might be doing the best by going for standard talk therapy with someone, actually that's not beneficial at times.
OK,
Wow.
I read about you last night. I read about this last night, and I'm actually finding it quite eye-opening and shocking today, what it is that you've had to go through. Because I didn't realise any of this. You wrote a play, I Wouldn't Mind Control. It was on in February.
That's right.
Tell us about that, and tell us what you think about how OCD is portrayed in life.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I wrote it was to sort of combat the misinformation or the sort of flattening of OCD that you would see a lot, because people often say, "Oh, I'm so OCD," when they mean they're neat. Or,
yeah.
Which, and OCD can sort of manifest as an obsession with order, but it often kind of flattens the experience, because tied to that is all these like intrusive thoughts. So I wrote the play. It's about OCD generally, broadly, but I guess also specifically about the OCD that I would have. So I guess maybe in a way it was also part of the exposure therapy, because I kind of wrote out some of the intrusive thoughts that plagued me, and I wrote about some of the ritualistic behaviours I would have to enact to combat them, and wrote them down for them to be performed in front of an audience. Was terrifying, but I think emotionally rewarding, ultimately.
And the play was on in February, but you're bringing it back as well?
I hope to, yes,
Yeah.
hopefully.
Brilliant.
Keep an eye out.
Yeah, absolutely. It is fascinating. I'd say for so many people here this morning listening to this, never were aware
No,
of
because
the
they're saying
levels
it's
of OCD.
3% of people in Ireland have been diagnosed with this. But Tara, would you think it's higher? We're not trying to scare people now, but it could be.
Yeah, I think so as well, because there's so many different categories of OCD as well. As we say, we always just think of the symmetry, the neat and the order, but there's so many different types.
Listen, thanks so much for coming in and talking to us, David. David Monaghan, of course, the play is I Wouldn't Mind Control if you do see it out and about again. And Tara Logan Buckley, psychologist as well. Always great to have you with us, Tara.
Thanks so much, guys.